Colonel Maria Johnson had always lived a life of discipline and honor. She had spent over 20 years in the United States Army, rising through the ranks with hard work, dedication, and loyalty to her country. On this particular evening, after a long day of meetings at the base, she decided to stop by the local supermarket to pick up some groceries. She was still in her Army uniform, a sharp outfit that carried her rank and medals with quiet pride. For Maria, wearing the uniform was not just about appearance, it was about representing service, sacrifice, and a promise to protect the nation. The supermarket was busy, filled with families shopping for dinner, children tugging at their parents, and workers rushing to get what they needed before heading home. Maria pushed her cart slowly down the aisles, her mind half on the shopping list and half on the day's events. Some people noticed her uniform as she walked by. A young boy pointed at her, whispering to his mother, who smiled warmly and said, "She's a soldier. She protects us." Maria gave the boy a gentle nod, the kind she had given countless times over the years to strangers who showed respect. But not everyone looked at her with admiration. Near the entrance of the supermarket stood Officer Bradley, a local police officer who had built a reputation for being aggressive and arrogant. Bradley was known among colleagues for his quick temper and rash decisions. While some in the community respected him for being tough, others whispered about his harsh behavior, especially toward people of color. He had already faced complaints in the past for discriminatory actions, but each time, the cases faded away without consequence. As Bradley entered the store, his eyes immediately landed on Maria. Instead of seeing a decorated Army officer, he let his prejudice twist what was in front of him. To him, a woman like Maria could not possibly hold such a high rank. He assumed she was pretending, playing soldier by wearing a uniform she had no right to wear. His jaw tightened and he began following her discreetly, each step filled with suspicion. He watched as she carefully read the labels on items, placed them into her cart, and moved calmly from aisle to aisle. To Bradley, her calmness was arrogance, and her dignity was a challenge to his authority. Maria, busy choosing fresh fruit, noticed the officer trailing behind her. At first, she thought little of it. Police officers often came into the store, and she assumed he was there to pick up groceries like everyone else. But after several minutes, she realized he was shadowing her movements, keeping his eyes fixed on her in a way that made her uncomfortable. Her instincts, sharpened by years in the Army, told her something was wrong. She decided to stay calm. The last thing she wanted was to escalate a situation that did not yet exist. She moved to the dairy section, picked up a carton of milk, and placed it in her cart. The officer followed closely, his footsteps echoing against the polished floor. A few shoppers noticed the odd behavior and began to whisper quietly among themselves. "Why is that cop following her?" one woman asked another. The tension in the air grew heavier with each passing minute, though Maria continued to hold her composure. At the checkout line, Maria stood patiently, her cart filled with groceries. She checked her phone for a message from her daughter, who was away at college. Her focus was interrupted when Officer Bradley suddenly stepped in front of her cart, blocking her path. His face was stern, his posture stiff with authority. Shoppers nearby paused to watch, sensing that something was about to happen. "Ma'am," Bradley said in a loud, commanding tone, "I need to see what's in your bag." His eyes darted to her uniform. "And I need to know why you're wearing that outfit. Are you pretending to be an officer?" Maria looked up at him, her voice steady and calm. "Officer, I am not pretending. I am a colonel in the United States Army. I just came from duty. If you'd like to see proof, I have my military identification right here." She reached carefully into her pocket, pulling out her ID. But Bradley refused to look at it. He shook his head and raised his voice even louder. "Don't try to trick me. You don't look like someone who belongs in that uniform. Impersonating a military officer is a crime. You could go to jail for this." The crowd around them grew larger. People pulled out their phones and began recording the scene, capturing every word. Some whispered in disbelief. Others gasped at the disrespect being shown to a woman who was clearly wearing her uniform with dignity. Children clung to their parents, confused and frightened by the rising tension. Maria's training told her to remain calm. She had been in far worse situations, battlefields where lives hung in the balance. This was different, but her self-control was her greatest weapon. She stood tall, looked the officer in the eye, and spoke firmly. Officer, I have served this country for more than 2 decades. I have been deployed overseas multiple times. I carry the rank of colonel. I am not a criminal, and I am not pretending. I am who I say I am. Bradley's face hardened, and his hand moved closer to the holster on his hip. The shoppers froze, realizing the confrontation was heading in a dangerous direction. Maria's heart beat steadily, but her face remained calm, her discipline unshaken. She knew that any sudden movement could trigger a reaction she did not want. For her, survival in this moment meant patience and courage. The store manager stepped forward nervously. "Officer, please," he said quietly. "There's no need to escalate. She's just shopping. Let her show her ID." But Bradley ignored him, his pride and prejudice blinding him to reason. He leaned closer to Maria, his voice sharp. "People like you always think you can get away with anything. Not today." Maria realized then that this was no ordinary encounter. This was not about groceries, uniforms, or even the law. This was about power, and about a man misusing the authority entrusted to him. She took a slow breath, silently praying for wisdom and strength. Around her, the shoppers waited, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief. The supermarket, once filled with the simple sounds of shopping carts and chatter, had turned into a stage where something much bigger was unfolding. Maria stood silently, her military ID still in her hand, her calmness shining in the storm of tension. The officer's arrogance was growing, and the crowd's unease was spreading. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was clear. This was the beginning of a moment that would change everything. The air inside the supermarket grew heavier as Officer Bradley's voice echoed across the aisles. Shoppers who had once been busy with groceries now stood frozen, their attention fixed on the standoff between the police officer and the Army colonel. Phones were held up high, recording every second. The once ordinary supermarket had turned into a tense battlefield, not of weapons and soldiers, but of arrogance, courage, and control. Maria Johnson, calm and steady, knew that her every word mattered. Years of training told her not to give in to fear. She had faced soldiers on hostile grounds, sat through briefings in war zones, and commanded troops in moments where panic meant death. But this was different. Here she stood in her own city, being accused of something unthinkable by a man in uniform who was supposed to protect citizens like her. Officer Bradley's hand hovered close to his holster. He stepped forward, his voice growing louder. "Don't move a muscle," he barked. "I said don't try to play games with me. You're lying about who you are. People like you don't get to wear that uniform." His tone was sharp, and each word was filled with disdain. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A young woman whispered to her friend, "She's in uniform, you can see the rank." "Why won't he just look at her ID?" An older man shook his head in disgust. "He doesn't want the truth," he muttered. "He wants control." Maria kept her voice calm, her hands visible. "Officer, I have shown you my identification. I am not resisting. I am only asking you to see the truth. My name is Colonel Maria Johnson. I have served this country for over 20 years. I deserve the same respect you demand in your uniform." Her words, steady and full of dignity, only seemed to enrage Bradley further. His face turned red, his pride refusing to bend. In a rash movement, he unlatched the strap on his holster, pulled out his service weapon, and pointed it directly at her chest. The crowd erupted in fear. Screams rang out. Parents pulled their children close, rushing to shield them from danger. Shopping carts were abandoned as people ran to the edges of the store or crouched behind shelves. A woman cried out, "He's going to shoot her!" Another shouted, "She hasn't done anything wrong!" Maria stood still, her heart pounding but her face composed. She knew that sudden movement could give him an excuse to act recklessly. She had seen this before, not in her own country, but in unstable lands where nervous fingers on triggers caused disasters. This moment demanded discipline greater than any battle she had fought. She took a deep breath, letting her training steady her. "Officer," she said in a calm but commanding voice, "put your weapon down. You are pointing a gun at a decorated officer of the United States Army. This is not only unnecessary but dangerous. There are civilians here. There are children here. You are putting lives at risk." Bradley's eyes narrowed, but his hand did not lower. He shouted back, "Don't tell me what to do. You're nothing but a fraud. If you really were in the Army, you'd know better than to mouth off to me. Now get on the ground before I make you." The shoppers could not believe what they were witnessing. Several voices rose in protest. A man near the frozen food section yelled, "She's not a fraud. Look at her ID." She's telling the truth. Another woman cried, "We're recording this. Everyone will see what you're doing." Bradley glanced at the raised phones but refused to back down. His pride was locked in a cage he had built for himself. Admitting he was wrong was something he could not do. He had let his prejudice blind him, and now he stood with a gun in his hand, trapped by his own arrogance. Maria did not flinch. She kept her eyes on him, steady and unwavering. "I have faced enemies abroad," she said, her voice ringing clear for everyone to hear. "But I never thought I would face a gun from someone sworn to protect us. Officer, you are making a mistake that will change your life forever. I will not resist you. I will not fight you. But I will not bow to false accusations." The tension in the supermarket rose higher, almost unbearable. A child began to cry loudly, her sobs cutting through the silence between words. Her mother tried to hush her, whispering, "It's going to be okay, baby," though her trembling voice betrayed her fear. In the corner, a cashier quickly reached for the phone and dialed 911. Her hands shook as she spoke into the receiver, explaining in a rush that a police officer was pointing a gun at a woman in uniform. "Send someone quick," she pleaded. "It's out of control here. People are scared. He won't listen to reason." Meanwhile, Bradley's grip on the gun remained firm. "Get down," he yelled again, his finger trembling near the trigger. His words were less steady now, a sign of his inner conflict. His voice cracked with frustration. He was no longer in control of the situation, though he tried to act as if he was. Maria saw the weakness in his posture, the way his voice faltered. She knew this was her chance. Without raising her voice, she spoke with calm authority, the same tone she had used on battlefields to lead soldiers through chaos. "You are not my enemy, Officer Bradley," she said. "You are supposed to be my ally. The badge you wear is meant to protect, not to threaten. Put the gun down before you harm not just me, but yourself and everyone who trusts you to do your job." Her words hit the crowd like a wave of courage. Several people shouted in agreement. "She's right," someone yelled. "You're supposed to protect us." Another added, "She's a colonel. Respect her rank." The voices grew stronger, rising above Bradley's authority. For the first time, Bradley hesitated. His eyes darted around, seeing dozens of phones pointed at him, recording his every move. He realized that no matter what happened next, he would not escape the eyes of the public. The world outside these walls would soon know everything, but pride still held him. He pressed the gun closer, his voice breaking. "Last warning," he barked, though his tone lacked the power it had before. Maria did not move. Her courage was unshakable. "I will not kneel to fear," she said firmly, "and I will not let you destroy the meaning of your uniform or mine. If you choose violence, the shame will be yours alone." The crowd grew louder, their voices pushing back against the officer's arrogance. Fear had turned into unity. Ordinary shoppers, parents, workers, students stood together, refusing to let injustice unfold silently. They did not touch him, but their presence was a wall of resistance, a reminder that truth was stronger than a gun. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The officer's gun remained pointed, but his hand shook now. Maria's calmness was breaking through his rage, her words carrying more power than his weapon. And then, faint but growing closer, came the sound of sirens outside the supermarket. The flashing red and blue lights spilled through the glass doors. Reinforcements were arriving. The crowd's fear turned into hope, though no one dared move just yet. Maria held her ground, her eyes locked on Bradley's trembling hand. The moment was not yet over. The gun was still pointed at her, the danger still real, but she knew she had planted seeds of truth in front of everyone watching. Whether the officer liked it or not, the world would soon see him for who he really was. The supermarket was no longer just a place for groceries. It had become a stage where justice and injustice collided, and though the gun remained steady in the officer's hands, Maria's courage made it clear that she was not the one in danger of losing. It was Bradley who stood at the edge of losing everything. The sound of sirens outside the supermarket grew louder, and flashing red and blue lights began to reflect through the glass doors. Shoppers, still frozen in place, felt both relief and fear. Relief that help was on its way, but fear that one wrong move could still trigger disaster. Officer Bradley's gun was still raised, pointed directly at Colonel Maria Johnson. His hand trembled slightly now, though his face was set in stubborn defiance. He was caught in his own pride, unable to admit he was wrong, yet fully aware that the eyes of the crowd and the lens of dozens of cameras were fixed on him. Maria stood tall, her eyes calm, her voice steady. Inside, her heart beat quickly, but outwardly she showed no fear. She had been trained for moments like this, to stay composed under pressure, to protect others even when danger stared her in the face. She could see Bradley's pride crumbling bit by bit, though his finger remained dangerously close to the trigger. Every second felt like a test of patience, a test of strength, and a test of justice. The supermarket doors opened suddenly, and two off-duty soldiers dressed in civilian clothes stepped inside. They had been nearby when they heard the commotion, and when the sound of sirens followed, they hurried in, knowing something serious was happening. Both men instantly recognized Maria. She was not only their superior officer, but also someone they deeply respected. She had commanded them during training, guided them through challenges, and earned their loyalty with her fairness and courage. "Colonel Johnson," one of them called out, his voice strong enough to cut through the tension. He took a few careful steps forward, raising his hands to show he carried no weapon. The other soldier stood beside him, equally cautious but equally determined. "We know her," the first soldier continued, looking directly at Bradley. "She is our commanding officer. She is Colonel Johnson of the United States Army. Put your weapon down. You're making a mistake." Bradley's eyes flickered with uncertainty. For a moment, doubt crossed his face, but then his pride pushed back. He barked, "Stay where you are! Don't interfere or I'll charge you too." His voice was firm, but the crack in his authority was clear. He was outnumbered not by weapons, but by truth. The crowd gasped at the soldier's words. Now there was undeniable proof. Maria was not pretending. She was exactly who she claimed to be. Whispers spread quickly among the shoppers. "She's really a colonel. Those men know her. Why doesn't he believe them?" The pressure around Bradley thickened as the weight of his actions grew heavier. Maria used the moment wisely. Her voice was calm, yet filled with authority. "You see, Officer Bradley," she said evenly, "others are here to confirm the truth. You've made a mistake. That is not shameful. What is shameful is refusing to admit it and endangering innocent lives." She gestured slightly toward the crying children, the frightened families, and the tense faces watching every move. "Look around you. Your gun is not only pointed at me, it is pointed at them too." Bradley's jaw tightened. His finger twitched on the trigger. Sweat trickled down his forehead. The weight of the crowd's eyes and the soldier's firm words pressed against his pride. He wanted to hold control, but control was slipping away. His actions were no longer seen as authority, but as abuse. He could feel it, yet he could not let go. At that moment, the sliding doors burst open again. Multiple uniformed police officers rushed in, responding to the urgent 911 call. Their sirens still wailed outside, and their radios crackled with rapid voices. The leader of the group, Sergeant Miller, stepped forward quickly, assessing the scene. His eyes widened at the sight of Bradley's gun pointed at Maria. "Bradley!" Sergeant Miller shouted, his voice commanding. "What are you doing? Lower your weapon immediately." His words carried the weight of authority that Bradley could not ignore. The other officers spread out, some moving toward the frightened shoppers, urging them to stay calm and move toward the exits, while others focused on their colleague with the raised gun. Bradley, however, did not lower his weapon. He shouted back, desperate to justify himself. "She's impersonating a military officer. She's lying about who she is." His voice cracked, betraying his desperation. He looked around wildly as if hoping someone would agree with him, but all he saw were accusing eyes and phones capturing his every move. "She's not lying," one of the off-duty soldiers said firmly. "She's our commanding officer. She is Colonel Maria Johnson. You're threatening an innocent woman and dishonoring the badge you wear." The crowd's voices grew louder. "Put the gun down," someone yelled. "She's telling the truth," another shouted. The supermarket had turned into a chorus of resistance against Bradley's stubborn pride. No one supported him. Not one voice backed his accusations. Maria stood her ground, speaking once more, her tone steady, calm, and commanding. "Officer Bradley, this is your last chance to do the right thing. Put the gun down. Admit your mistake. Show the world that you can be better than this, or you will face consequences that you cannot escape." Her words were not threats but promises. Promises built on truth and justice. Sergeant Miller stepped closer, his hand raised in a firm signal. "Bradley," he said sharply, "listen to me. Drop your weapon now. You're pointing a gun at a decorated Army officer. You're out of line. If you don't lower it, you will be disarmed, and you will face charges." His tone left no room for doubt. Bradley's eyes darted between Maria, the soldiers, the sergeant, and the sea of phones recording him. His pride battled with the truth that surrounded him. He wanted to believe his own words, but the evidence was overwhelming. Slowly, the reality of his situation began to sink in. The crowd was against him. His fellow officers were against him. His career, his reputation, his very future. All of it was hanging by a thread, and every second he kept that gun raised cut the thread thinner. His hand trembled more visibly now. Sweat dripped onto his uniform. His breathing grew unsteady. For the first time, fear, not of Maria but of the consequences, flooded his face. Still, his pride held on tightly, refusing to let go of the illusion of control. Maria's calm voice cut through his storm. "You are not my enemy, Bradley," she said softly, almost gently now. "The enemy is the fear inside you. Put the gun down. Free yourself from this mistake before it destroys everything." Her words seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Even the crowd grew quiet, waiting for his decision. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The tension was thick enough to choke the air. Then finally his grip loosened. The gun lowered, inch by inch, until it pointed toward the ground. A collective sigh of relief swept through the supermarket. Some shoppers even clapped softly, though the tension was not yet fully gone. Two officers moved quickly, taking the weapon from Bradley's hand and pulling him back. His face burned with humiliation as handcuffs were snapped onto his wrists. He tried to speak, tried to defend himself, but his words fell empty in the sea of truth. The cameras recorded everything. His fall from authority was complete, witnessed by all. Maria exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since the confrontation began. The soldiers stepped forward, saluting her respectfully, their eyes filled with admiration. The crowd broke into murmurs of relief, some approaching Maria to thank her for her courage. Parents comforted their children, while others wiped away tears of stress and fear. Sergeant Miller approached Maria and nodded respectfully. "Colonel Johnson," he said, his voice heavy with sincerity, "on behalf of the department, I am deeply sorry for what you just endured. You handled this with more grace and courage than most could ever manage. I promise you justice will be served." Maria nodded, her face calm but her heart heavy. She had not wanted a confrontation, only to buy groceries after a long day. Yet she had been forced to stand tall in the face of injustice once again. She looked around at the shoppers, at the frightened children, at the families who had been caught in the storm of one man's arrogance. Her voice was quiet but firm as she said, "I only did what was right. The uniform I wear is not mine alone. It represents all who serve, and I will never let its honor be stained." The sirens outside faded as order returned inside the store. But everyone knew the story was far from over. The videos were already spreading online. Bradley's actions would not be hidden. The world would soon know what had happened here. And for Maria, though the danger had passed, the fight for justice had only just begun. The supermarket slowly returned to a fragile calm after the shocking confrontation. Parents held their children close. Shoppers whispered about what they had just witnessed, and phones buzzed as videos of the incident spread rapidly across social media platforms. Within minutes, clips of Officer Bradley pointing a gun at Colonel Maria Johnson filled timelines, shared by shocked witnesses who wanted the world to see what had happened. What had started as a tense, frightening moment in one grocery store was now becoming a national story. Maria stood near the exit with Sergeant Miller, still calm but visibly tired from the emotional weight of the situation. She answered questions with patience as officers collected statements from witnesses. The two off-duty soldiers who had defended her remained by her side, offering quiet support. People approached her cautiously, some to thank her, others to apologize for standing by silently while the situation unfolded. Maria accepted each word with grace, telling them gently, "You don't need to apologize. The truth is what matters," and it came to light. Outside, news crews had already begun arriving. Word traveled fast, and reporters with cameras were eager to capture the story. Within hours, the video of Bradley pulling his gun on Maria trended online. Headlines appeared. Police officer points gun at Army colonel in supermarket. Decorated female officer threatened by cop. And supermarket confrontation sparks outrage. Millions of people across the country watched the footage, their responses filled with anger, shock, and disbelief. At the police station, Bradley was booked and placed under investigation. His superiors had little choice. The evidence was overwhelming. The video showed clearly that Maria had offered her identification, explained her position, and maintained calm while Bradley escalated without reason. Social media amplified the outrage and protests began forming outside the police department within 24 hours. Citizens held signs demanding justice, chanting that no one should face such treatment, especially someone who had dedicated her life to serving the country. Maria, however, remained quiet in the days that followed. She returned home, focusing on her family and her duties. Her phone rang endlessly with requests from journalists, activists, and even politicians who wanted her to share her story. At first, she declined, not wanting to add fuel to the storm. But as the pressure grew, and as she saw how many people were using her story as a symbol for change, she agreed to a few interviews. On live television, she sat calmly across from a reporter who asked her about the moment Bradley pulled the gun. Maria's voice was steady as she replied, "I stayed calm because that is what I was trained to do. But more importantly, I stayed calm because there were children in that supermarket. There were families. Escalating would have put them in danger. I did what any soldier should do. I protected the people around me." Her words resonated deeply with viewers. Messages of support poured in from across the nation. Veterans organizations released statements praising her courage. Community leaders honored her restraint and dignity. Parents wrote online that they hoped their children could grow up to be as strong as she had been in that moment. Maria's story became more than a local news report. It became a lesson in grace under pressure. Meanwhile, Bradley faced growing consequences. He was suspended without pay while the investigation continued. Former complaints about his conduct resurfaced, and this time they were not ignored. The mayor of the city gave a public statement apologizing to Maria and promising reforms. "This incident should never have happened," the mayor said during a press conference. "We owe Colonel Johnson and all citizens the assurance that those who are sworn to protect them are held to the highest standard. The city will take immediate action to review our police force and prevent abuses of power like this from occurring again." The police chief also spoke, his tone somber. He admitted that the department had failed to act on earlier complaints about Bradley's behavior. "We should have seen the warning signs. We did not, and for that we are accountable. Colonel Johnson showed restraint and courage, qualities every officer should embody. Officer Bradley's behavior was unacceptable, and he will be held responsible." Across the country, debates sparked about the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served. Some pointed to Maria's story as evidence of deep flaws that needed urgent fixing. Others highlighted the courage of bystanders who recorded the event, proving that truth could not be hidden. Discussions filled newsrooms, classrooms, and community meetings. The supermarket confrontation had ignited a conversation far bigger than anyone expected. Maria herself remained humble. When asked if she was angry, she simply replied, "I do not hold anger in my heart. I hold responsibility. Responsibility to stand for what is right. Responsibility to show that dignity is stronger than hate. Responsibility to remind others that uniforms, whether army or police, represent service, not power over others." Her calm and thoughtful words inspired many. People began writing letters to her, thanking her for her service, her bravery, and her example. Children sent drawings of soldiers saluting. Veterans shared their pride, telling her she had carried herself with the honor that defined true service. Still, Maria carried the memory of that day heavily. She replayed the moment in her mind, not out of fear but out of reflection. She thought of the young girl crying in the store, the parents shielding their children, the frightened cashier who called 911. She hoped they would not be scarred by the experience, but instead learn from it. That courage and truth were stronger than arrogance and prejudice. In the weeks that followed, the city held meetings to address concerns. Community members demanded accountability and reform. Officers underwent new training programs focusing on bias, respect, and de-escalation. Maria was invited to speak at one of these sessions, not as a victim, but as a leader. Standing before a room full of officers, she spoke with quiet strength. "Authority is not about control," she told them. "It is about service. When you wear a uniform, you are trusted with lives, not power. Never forget that." Her words left the room silent, officers reflecting deeply on the weight of their responsibility. Many later admitted that her speech had changed the way they viewed their role in the community. As the investigation into Bradley continued, pressure mounted. Protesters carried signs outside City Hall demanding justice. News channels aired panel discussions about reform. The story spread even beyond the country, as international outlets picked up the video and reported on it as an example of both injustice and resilience. Maria continued her life quietly, never seeking fame. But she could not escape the recognition that followed her. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her. Children waved at her in admiration. Elderly veterans saluted her when she passed by. Each time she responded with humility, saying only, "I did what anyone should do." Bradley, on the other hand, faced a very different reality. Isolated, disgraced, and stripped of his authority, he waited as the legal process moved forward. His actions had not only cost him his job, but also his reputation. The same cameras that had once recorded him standing tall now showed his downfall to the world. The incident had become more than a personal battle between one officer and one soldier. It had become a symbol of the dangers of unchecked pride and prejudice, a symbol of the power of calm strength, and a symbol of how truth, even when threatened by a gun, will always stand stronger. Maria knew the story was far from over. Justice was a slow path, but she believed it would come. For now, she was content to return to her duties, to serve her country as she always had, and to live her life with the dignity that had carried her through every trial. She carried herself with the quiet knowledge that sometimes the greatest battles are not fought on distant fields, but in the heart of one's own community, and that true victory lies not in defeating others, but in standing firm for what is right. Weeks passed after the supermarket incident, but the memory of that day did not fade. Instead, it grew stronger as videos continued to circulate online and news channels replayed the story almost daily. People across the country knew the name of Colonel Maria Johnson, not just as a decorated officer, but as the woman who had stood calmly and bravely while a police officer pointed a gun at her. For many, she had become a symbol of dignity and strength. The investigation into Officer Bradley moved quickly because the evidence was overwhelming. His actions were recorded from multiple angles, showing clearly how Maria had remained calm and offered her identification, while he ignored it and escalated the situation. Testimonies from shoppers, cashiers, and the two off-duty soldiers confirmed every detail. Even his own fellow officers admitted they could not defend his behavior. Bradley tried to argue that he had felt threatened, but no one believed him. The videos told the truth, and the truth was against him. Finally, the police department announced its decision. Bradley was fired from his position, his badge taken away permanently. He also lost his license to serve as a law enforcement officer in any other city or state. The announcement was met with applause and relief from the community. People gathered outside the station holding signs that read, "Justice for Maria and protect, don't threaten." For the first time in years, many felt their voices had been heard. Maria, however, did not celebrate his downfall. When asked by reporters for her reaction, she simply said, "It is not about one man losing his job. It is about ensuring that what happened in that supermarket never happens again to anyone. My hope is that this serves as a lesson, not a punishment." Her words, filled with humility, struck a chord with people across the nation. They saw in her not just a victim of injustice, but a leader who rose above anger and sought fairness instead. In recognition of her courage and composure, Maria was invited to a community event at the city's Central Park. The mayor, community leaders, and hundreds of residents attended. Families brought their children. Veterans arrived wearing their old uniforms, and banners hung from every corner with words of gratitude. The stage was simple, but the emotions were powerful. When Maria walked onto the stage, the crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Applause thundered through the park. Some people had tears in their eyes as they looked at her, remembering the terrifying video of her standing so calmly with a gun pointed at her. She did not wave or smile grandly. Instead, she placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect to the people who had supported her. The mayor gave a speech, praising Maria not only for her military service, but also for her bravery in the supermarket. Colonel Johnson showed the world that true strength is not measured by weapons or power, but by courage and restraint, he said. In the face of fear, she protected not only herself but everyone in that store. For that, we owe her our deepest gratitude. Afterward, Maria was invited to speak. She walked up to the microphone, the crowd silent, waiting for her words. Her voice was steady, filled with calm authority. I did not seek recognition, she began. I went to the supermarket that day simply as a soldier, a mother, and a citizen. But when the moment demanded strength, I chose to stand firm because that is what I was trained to do, and because it was the right thing to do. She paused, scanning the crowd, her eyes resting on the children sitting on their parents' shoulders, waving small flags. This incident is not just about me, she continued. It is about justice. It is about respect. It is about ensuring that the uniforms we wear, whether they are army green or police blue, represent honor, service, and fairness. None of us should forget that. The crowd erupted in applause once again, cheering her words. Some shouted, "Thank you, Colonel." Others chanted her name. Maria smiled gently, humbled by their support. At the end of the event, a plaque was unveiled in front of the supermarket where the incident had taken place. It bore Maria's name and a short inscription, in honor of Colonel Maria Johnson, whose courage and dignity reminded us all that true strength is found in discipline, fairness, and respect. Shoppers who passed by the plaque in the following days often stopped to read it, reminded that their ordinary store had once been the stage for an extraordinary act of bravery. Life slowly returned to normal for Maria. Though nothing would ever be quite the same, she continued her duties as a colonel, leading her soldiers with the same discipline and care as always. But now, she carried with her the knowledge that her actions had touched countless lives. Veterans invited her to speak at gatherings, schools asked her to share her story with students, and community organizations sought her guidance in building bridges of trust. Each time she accepted with humility, focusing not on herself but on the larger message, dignity is stronger than hate. Meanwhile, Bradley faded from public life. His name became a warning of what unchecked pride and prejudice could lead to. He faced legal charges for his actions and lived in the shadow of the videos that had exposed him. For him, the supermarket was the end of his authority. For Maria, it was the beginning of a legacy. One evening, as Maria walked through the same supermarket with her daughter, she noticed people still recognized her. A cashier whispered, "That's her," and smiled warmly. A young boy approached shyly, holding his mother's hand, and asked, "Are you the soldier who stood up to the policeman?" Maria knelt down, meeting his eyes, and replied softly, "I am. But more importantly, I am someone who believes in doing the right thing, no matter how hard it is." The boy smiled and nodded, as if he had just learned a lesson he would never forget. Maria and her daughter continued shopping, the ordinary rhythm of life restored, yet the air carried a new sense of respect. People knew they were in the presence of someone who had faced injustice with courage and walked away with honor. The supermarket confrontation became a story told for years to come. Parents told their children about the colonel who stayed calm under pressure. Teachers used it as an example of integrity and bravery. Soldiers used it to remind one another that discipline was not just for the battlefield, but for every moment of life. For Maria, the true reward was not the applause, the plaque, or the media attention. It was the quiet knowledge that she had lived up to her values, that she had stood for truth when it mattered most. She had shown that even when fear and arrogance pointed a weapon at her, she would not bow. Her story ended not with violence, but with justice, not with anger, but with peace. And as she walked forward into the future, she carried with her the message that true strength lies not in forcing others down, but in lifting the truth up.